Hello, everybody. We are with the Coaches Corner tonight. How are you lovely gentlemen doing?
Good.
Excellent.
Fabulous. As everybody is getting settled, I'm just going to say a couple words before we get started. Feel free to ask questions. Try to keep them on topic if at all possible. Our lovely coaches will try to get to your questions. And if they cannot, it is not personal. It is just time management. So feel free to head over to the Coaches Lounge, no, Coaches Corner, and they will be sure to answer some of your questions there as well if we can't get to it tonight. So with that being said, I'm going to disappear and I'm going to hand this off to you, Duke Brannos, to introduce the special guest of the evening.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Nice to see your smiling face once again.
Thank you.
So welcome everybody again. Looking forward to a great episode. I had the chance to sit down and go on Great Fighters of YouTube on Tuesday night and listen to Kraven, and I'm looking very forward to actually diving into his methods of teaching and fighting and such after that conversation. So tonight we got His Grace Kraven, who's has a great career, done amazing stuff on Tuesday night. I learned that you take the office, he's probably served it, which is amazing. Someone that's truly helped the society in general. Tonight, the good part is we get to really dive in and get the background of another great fighter in the society. And of course, we have Duke Sean. Unfortunately, the good looking one of us, all of us, it wasn't able to join us, and that was Ragnvaldr tonight. He'll be back for some other episodes later, but tonight he told us that, told me we were welcome to make fun of him all night. So if you have any personal questions for him, I really suggest you reach out and ping him and make sure that he's watching. But to go ahead and get the show running, I just want to remind everybody, please go ahead and submit questions. Again, if we don't understand it, we'll make up stuff. No, I mean, we'll try to clarify it the best we can, and maybe answer, throw something back out to you to make sure we have the question answered. If for some reason your question doesn't get answered, post it immediately on the SCA Coaches Corner. And I tell you, if one of the coaches don't answer it out of there, we have a great crew of people that just really enjoy helping people on that site. And it's just amazing to be able to be around so many of them. They're all, lots of them are producing great videos, and so please go out there and post it. But I'll stop rambling, and we'll throw it back over to His Grace Kraven.
Okay, that was a good pitch. Okay, so basically we were talking earlier about what's my fighting philosophy that I look at. For me, it's pretty common to most of you guys, because I listen to you guys talk, and we've talked in person, and my philosophy is everybody is uniquely different, and they have their own different skill sets and different pieces they bring. And I try to approach fighting for myself, and it reflects into the process that I train, but is more of building off of the foundation with the different pillars, so like range, footwork, body mechanics, and all those pieces, and keeping those as a kind of building a framework, so all different styles can kind of flow into those, depending, because we don't have weight classes in our hobby with fighting, but really, that's usually it. And, because I don't believe in limiting things, because, there's always those guys that do some weird, unique things that work for them. I mean, Miles proved that you could do a back fist. It might not be the greatest idea all the time, but it does work sometimes for him, and I think other people build up their own things, and I guess, a little bit of that's from beginning with being a lefty and people telling me there's certain things I couldn't do and I shouldn't fight a round shield and stuff like that. So that kind of forced me to grow and remember everybody else is in the same shoes I'm in, so I guess that's really the philosophy in a nutshell.
So maybe they weren't telling you to, maybe the round shield piece wasn't so much the issue. Maybe wearing it as a hat. The sombrero.
Yeah, that's right. Tell us about the sombrero block.
Oh, well,
So where did that come from?
Okay,
And
I actually have that story.
Can you teach it to me?
Sure. We're gonna cut you off at the knees first, Sean.
Okay.
Actually, I picked it up. The concept. I was watching Duke Torkel and at Estrella doing pickups, right? And he's a wiry guy, and he got a really wide stance, and he was fighting like a smaller heater at the time. And it was when like the guys more from the western side of the world were fighting the smaller shields and kind of shrinking. And I saw him just duck under his shield, right? And he just squatted. That was the part that I caught, was that he squatted down. And I was used to trying to use my shield as a hiding device, being small, right? And so I was like, I really should try to incorporate that. So I started just ducking under it, but I keep my feet so close together to where his were wide. And that's when I started just doing that straight down drop, just, like I'm sitting in the chair, the stool, right? And I started seeing legs being left-handed. You just see a flat snap to a leg. It was, glorious for 6 months until everybody figured out how to, react to that. But that's where actually that came from, was just doing that, and then finding out that I could hide behind that shield really well by just crouching down.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about like how that developed for you, right? I always talk about how that there is no master style. There are master practitioners, and that's one of those things that you see a thing and you try to emulate it, and it ends up being something that is like totally unique to you. And where you that you saw Torquil do it, and he was like, oh, I bet I could do that. And then in trying to mimic that and imitate that, you end up coming up with something that is completely different, that is uniquely your own. And that's why I was only partially kidding about, hey, can you teach it to me? Because I know that that's one of those unique things that you do, that it is a trademark of your style. But I think I know that there's so many people out there that are like, show me your magic trick.
Yeah.
If I can do the sombrero block, then I'll be as good as Kraven.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work like that.
Well, I think, and it's going to follow. We have a question. I'm going to pop into it in a second. But I think that actually, like Kraven said earlier, the fundamentals have to be there first before you can break them, right? I mean,
Right.
you don't like, it's like, okay, Brannos does this well, this crazy shot well, and Sean does this well, and Kraven does this well. I'm just going to put those pieces together. And then you end up with nothing really, right? Because you don't have the fundamentals,
Yeah.
right? And it actually kind of falls into a question that was thrown out here. I'm going to go ahead and throw this out to you, Kraven, and that is, while at practice, how many forms will you change between that one practice, or to get the most out of practice? I think it's forms and styles. Do you actually change up styles at practice, or
Like weapon systems?
Yeah, or even not even weapon systems. Could even be, hey, I'm gonna fight, Funny Foot, or I'm gonna try this thing.
Yeah. Well, like, to the round shield thing part a little bit, I think the one thing that's common with people that work, that really are on the path of studying fighting as their passion and their art, they end up exploring. And I think that's where that stuff derives from. And, and so in turn at practice, I am always trying to explore new, things, and I'll switch up my fighting style. Yeah. Depending on who I'm fighting, or if I'm working on something to where, just even something basic as trying to gain a corner, and I'm fighting somebody that, fades back a lot, somebody that fights at A range, somebody fights at B, or has lateral movement, just to get samplings for my database at practice. And then I'll switch up my feet, or I'll, press hard, do light, and just change up things, just to throw variables in there to get samplings of everything I can, looking for a commonality amongst everything, to try to exploit off the commonality of it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too is there's, it goes back to those foundational principles, because you and I can do that, and we can switch up those things in the middle of the fight. We can switch, we can try one thing all throughout one particular practice. We can do that, but I think early on it's important to establish those foundations. Stephen of Beckenham is a great example of somebody who, a lot of the stuff that Steve does is just like weird, bizarre, kind of stuff. And he looks like he's just kind of lazy and just kind of hanging out, got his sword tipped down and all this. And a lot of the really creative and crazy stuff that he does, people need to understand that, like, I had worked with one of his squires, Galen, when he came down to a training I did in Glen Aubin. Galen came down, and I didn't know he was squire to Steve. I just knew he was from the general area. And I saw him fighting, and I said, "Okay, you got to stop, because you're not Steve. You got to." And it's because he has the foundational principles down so well. He understands the mechanics so well that he can violate the principles of the sport, basically. And to your point, Kraven, that discovery and that exploration and that the what if of it all. But you definitely have to have that foundation down before you can start, as Bruce Lee says, no form from form, right? You don't just go to no form, because that's just a mess. And you have to understand what those principles are before you can start deviating from those things.
Yeah, well, it's like, when you don't have the tools for anything you do, it's like, like I've been doing baking. I had to learn tools and basic pieces to it before I can go do other things like laminating dough and working with, you got to be able to knead, and I think a lot of times people kind of want to skip those things because they want to have success. Things look easy, and they don't really realize those tools are the key factors. And the people that are on, as you grow, your toolbox gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really, I think you hit a good point there. Is if you look at the guys that are out there, I think they go through that space of, we have some conditioning to do, then we have our basics to just work on our basics, and then we get a little past our basics, we start throwing some non-standard shots. And when I say by that is not crazy shots or anything, but we start throwing a lot more offsides, and we'll experiment with bigger shots. And then slowly, we keep working through, we start seeing other people doing stuff like your sombrero block, right? And then it's like, hey, I want to try that. And then we see if it's going to work for us, or see if we have to modify it a bit for our body or our structure. And then it's funny, because after we get all through that, we just kind of let things go, and the mind starts being the key, right? I'm gonna break this person down, like you're talking about, that all that probing. I'm gonna speed this up and slow it down and see what the person does. And now I'm gonna cut in his corner and see what he does. Now I'm gonna pull him and see where the weaknesses are. So you got all of that place going. The technique is fundamental because it's still there, but now you're like, okay, now this is a chess match. And then, even after that, then we get into that space of, finding that place where lots of people are like, right at the beginning, they're like, I wanted Bruce Lee's empty mind. And it's like, boy, you have to fill that mind before and make everything, just part of you before you can really be that empty mind. And that's a really hard place, for while you're, you talk about probing and stuff like that and trying to make people make mistakes. Well, once you get really good at it, you just start picking those up. You don't have to think about making them do it. You just know that, hey, this is what I do, and I'm going to see where this is going, But there are other times, like for me, I do tons of more movement than I ever have, but I have to think, it's like, oh, I should probably move now. Okay. But it just takes time, right?
Yeah. Well, and that, and you touched on a very important part too. It's like, seeing reading the person while they're fighting. Well, at training, you're trying to pick that up. So when your mind sees something, it just goes and reacts. We're trying to kill that reaction time.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times that gets missed, because people are like, how do you see this? How do you know this? Like, I always get asked about the preemptive blocking. And it's like, well, I know where people are standing and their position of their body. And I know what targets are open. So I know that's the zone to block. I'm betting, and but that's practice and practice and practice and figuring out where it's at to build the database. But nothing works. I can't throw a shot unless I throw good technique. If I have good feet, I have all the basics. Otherwise, I can sit there and do nothing and defend the whole time, and that's it.
Yeah. And how do I know where that block needs to be? Is because I've been hit by that a lot.
Yeah.
That's an experience. Brannos mentioned that you gotta fill your mind before you can empty your mind, and I think that's huge. There's a lot of shots that I used to throw that were, some might consider trick shots, or a little more complicated, or some more complicated mechanics that I used to throw a lot of, and I just don't throw those shots anymore because I don't need them. But that was I needed to go through all of that as part of my evolution. Another thing that Bruce Lee talks about is, when I first started, learning Kung Fu, a kick was more than a kick, and a punch was, or a kick was just a kick and a punch was just a punch, that whole line. And that's a lot of it, is like, the more you get into it, it's like, oh, I want to do this and this and this, and I want to try this. And you go through that discovery, and you go through that what if stuff. And then eventually, you can kind of settle down into that and get to that no mind. But it takes a lot of trying a lot of really crazy stuff and making that work before you go, oh, okay, well, I don't need all that. But you had to go through all that to get there.
Yeah, I would agree too. And and the one thing too, I always remind myself, because we had a guy in the backyard, Dick Mark Newman, used to practice at my house when he was banished, right? And helping us try to learn how to win a crown. And he's very simple about his mythology, right? And the one thing he always reminded me, because you get into this, we sometimes get out to that far away place when we start talking about fighting, like this angle and this position and this, and we kind of go in deep. It's because we're passionate about it. But he reminded me of one thing all the time: you just have to hit the other guy with a stick first.
Right. And keep him from hitting you with the stick.
Yeah. And I think after you get to a certain point, though, of learning and building, you get to that point, and that's really probably your goal in the long run, to keep it simplified. Yeah.
But you have to kind of go through that complicated stuff before you get there, right?
I think so.
Just as part of the process. Fighting.
Yeah. And and the one thing, like we were talking Tuesday a little bit too, that made me think is, we're all from a generation of fighters that went to practice. We learned by trial and error, fighting other people all the time, right? And then, so the campfire storyteller is our trainer, and he's telling us about how so-and-so he saw fight once and to do this and this. And we're storytelling, teaching, right? And then when you look at to where, when you start rolling into the 2000s and so forth, a lot more people, we're at, at the high peak of the SCA, people are traveling everywhere, and then they start communicating with each other, and Sean, you probably, you've traveled a lot teaching and stuff, and you experienced to watch this, and, and then going to Pennsic and so forth, Great Western, blah, blah, blah. There's all these events to go to. And what you've started seeing, I think, an evolution in our stuff is people like ourselves, where we're like, hey, we really need to formalize this. I want to be able to take a guy, get him through his first 2 years of fighting quicker than it would take us back in the day, where it was 6 years of the guy getting to a skill competency, because we weren't teaching the basics. We were just going flat snap, offside, you're too close, you're too far, raise your shield a little bit, and then that was it.
Yeah, I would agree 100% there. In fact, what I've found is, even especially through this period of time when we have time, I found that I'm getting even more into the discipline of what it takes to be physically in that space. It's we spend a lot of time, this ain't right, that ain't right. Now we're spending a lot more time with the mental philosophy and perfect throwing and all the fundamentals in that way. But now it's like, a lot of the first guys I get, I'm like, okay, you're going to do body weight squats first, just so you start understanding how to get strength in your legs and what your legs can do. And then we're going to get on the balls of your feet, right? Because we ignore all of that and just expect them to know it until, but those are just fundamental. So, a lot of that's coming in for me from boxing, right? So those are the first two things I throw out there, but then we add ladder drill and cone drills, and then we're adding pad drills and stuff like that. Like, I'm going to tell you how many people that can't walk on an angle either way or back or forward and throw in time is crazy. I mean, these are knights and everyone else that I'm doing this with, you know. So I think the evolution, like you're saying, it's really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of all of this, especially with people like you sharing that knowledge and stuff like that. You know, we have such a great space to do this now.
Yeah, well, I think what the current time has provided to us at this point is the fact that we have taken time to sit there and, like, we all know each other, right? Our commonality is we've fought each other, we lost each other, we may even had a few drinks with each other or whatever, and you know, so that's our connection, right? But the one thing that we're never really connected is in that network of people training and as trainers and coaches. That is the big disconnect. You know, we all have these commonalities because, like, when we were going through, when Keegan moved here, you know, it was like, hey, let's formalize practice, right? You know, I'm like, yeah, I really want to start teaching guys instead of just having a meat grinder with 20 guys, seeing how many you can win. And when you're a squire, you only get good at getting in line, right? And you know, and we started just formalizing and doing, you know, lesson plans, blah, blah, and you see these guys grow. And then, you know, I go to Penzik and start talking to guys, and I'm like, oh yeah, I was just working with Brannos and we were talking about range. I'm like, yeah, well, now we have a common language, but we're still disconnected and we're all teaching the same stuff, you know. And I was like, oh, good. You know, we're not teaching something totally different than some other kingdom kind of thing, you know. It's like, yeah. And I think during this time, it points out that disconnect and as an opportunity to grow it back to being tighter, like, you know, with the coach's corner and stuff like that. And I think that will evolve fighting to the next step, personally.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do with the coach's corner, is trying to create that community. And you know, because I think we for a long time we've been kind of doing this in pockets here and there. I mean, Brannos and I have been teaching, like, kind of on parallel tracks. But you know, this is the first time that we've been able to, like, work together to kind of get to help to change how people teach. And you know, Kraven, you and I had done some work you know, years ago too, when you had you've got the farm, right? You got everybody at your house that was doing the practice, and so you were kind of doing it in your own little pocket there as well. And I think what this time is given us is much more access to so that everybody has access to what we have access to, you know, because, you know, I go to Australia and I work with you and on some stuff. I remember, you know, when you were before you'd won Crown, we were, you know, we were hours and hours on end, right? You know, talking about this stuff. And I think it's, you know, I think the game changer for me was the Known World Rattan Symposium in 2005. I think that's when it really, you know, that's the first time that I started kind of training on a kind of a global level, kind of a known world level. And you know, that was a change, and there's more of it. We're definitely teaching our sport better now, and now we're providing better access to what the three of us have enjoyed for decades.
Yeah. So, you know what? Going back to that original question, because they clarified a little bit, they are asking when at practice, not only, you know, as you're practicing different things, how many different things you practice at any given time, but do you switch up a lot at practice, like, you know, between I won't say the M word because that's I know a bunch of guys on Tuesday night will yell at me, but they're like, do you switch up between like glaive and sword and shield or Florentine?
No.
Yeah.
No, you know, culturally, you know, that's one of those cultural things where here it's, you know, there's guys that's their focus, but you know, you don't switch up. We used to practice it once a month, right? And our organized practice. And the problem is we would we would miss 2 practices afterwards because we all hurt each other.
Yeah.
And then next thing, it's like, I'm not fighting Bastardor this week. I'm just going to go, I'll skip this week so I can keep fighting for 2 more weeks instead of having my arms beat up and my ribs beat up, you know, which I know it sounds stupid, but it's like, nah. And then my interest, honestly, is sword board. I mean, you know, I support people do whatever fighting style they want, but mine's that. And that's where I like and enjoy the most.
I know for me, I know I've seen a lot of people, especially unbelted fighters that want to go through the whole weapons rack in one fighter practice and fight with everything. And, my advice there is that, pick a thing, whatever that thing is going to be, and dedicate some time to it. Because when you get right down to it, footwork is footwork, range is range. There's so many commonalities in each of the different weapons, but there are subtle, minute differences between each of them. And if you, yeah, I think you have to establish a foundation again. You have to establish a foundation. You have to pick a weapon, whatever that's going to be, gain some measure of proficiency with that weapon, because then you understand you're building the common building blocks, in one weapon system, and then the footwork from sword and shield to greatsword is a minor deviation, right? But it's different enough that if you're trying to learn all of them all of the time, you don't learn any one of them, and you never learn the commonality of them. And so learn one, and then you can branch off into the others. And then I would recommend, if you want to get better at greatsword, fight that for 6 months. If you want to get better at Madu, or you want to do Florentine, fight it consistently. But the idea of switching up weapons all throughout one fighter practice, that takes a pretty high level of proficiency to be able to just kind of, because really you're not really learning any of those things. You're just playing with all of them, and that's fine if that's what you want to do. But if you want to become proficient at each of those, dedicate some time to those. And I mean, every several months of just that weapon system.
Yeah, there's no way around it. It's like I broke my hand, so I started fighting rapier, and then and I did that for a few months, and I was really having a good time learning a different fighting game, right? And I'm like, this is kind of cool. But I went, I had more interest in the hard suit at the time, so I went back to hard suit. Hurt my hand again. I'm like, this time I'm going to stay over here for a while. And I'm like the new guy over there, other than I'm used to being in combat, and I understand the combat, and I understand some principles. I just need how to apply range and tempo and everything else over there, but it is one of the things where I've been fighting for 25 years. I'm over here doing rapier, learning how to do rapier, not taking over rapier, and I think that's with any of our weapon styles. You have to dedicate time, because there's a lot of nuances to it.
Yeah, I agree.
I like.
Go ahead, Sean.
I was just real quick. I like fighting rapier because they don't know how good I am, and they don't know how good I'm not.
Yeah, I think the big key there is the great parts in all of that, especially when you're at this level. People are at that level of the game. Your range control and things, then your finesse kind of falls into that really fast. You understand how to manipulate, and you understand how to again probe and see what the weaknesses of your opponents are. The hard part is point control and all of those other pieces that you still have to know about the weapon. But it's a big step up. I mean, you got 80% of the game. Now you have to learn the subtleties of the weapons that you're using, and what they can do and what you can't, and things like that. There was another really good question for you. He says, obviously you guys had a training practice. You guys changed from just bear pit, go out, fight, whatever, type of practice, to a more organized practice. I think there's a lot of people out there looking at, like, how do you make that change? He said, what approach do you take in order to help a fighter become a better trainer and encourage innovation within your group? I think innovation probably on that end of how do we move forward to do things better?
Oh, at that time it was, we had a good, we were lucky with numbers. Numbers was a key thing to what made this successful. So we have 3 knights that are interested in doing things, and actually 3 different perspectives at this practice, and the need was, we got to have some kind of formal way to teach people the elements of fighting and move them through them, right? Well, we had to analyze, what is range, what's body mechanics, what's pressure, what's footwork, so we basically sat at the table and wrote lesson plans. and discuss these elements of how to teach them and how to do that with these groups. And we were in this position where we had 1 to 2, 3 year fighters, or like that were active fighting, at that level, and then people that have been fighting for quite a while, just they were stuck at that mid-level. So we had to separate them into 2 different groups and teach them 2 different things at that point. And by having the lesson plan, really, it's like anything, if you ever taught at a collegium, it's like you got to have notes, you have to have your outline and lesson plan. And the thing that helped us with that part was it helped organize it, and also created a methodology for doing it at practice. So and then what we did to help grow this is kind of like that, the corporate, closed loop, it's where you get feedback. And so we would run 8-week sessions, and then at the end of the 8 weeks, we'd have a meeting and get feedback from our users, basically.
Awesome.
That is the key thing there. And and then we'd also poll them, like, what do you want to go into now? And it's like, because we really kept it, like, we did range for 8 weeks, and we ran drills and different aspects to that. And then when we did pressure, we did it, which had a lot more different variety of things, because you're trying to learn how other people do those kind of things. It gets more variable by the individual, but we would get that through there. And then the other part is the guys that were in the advanced group, we'd actually have them regurgitate like the range class to the next sequence of guys, so they got trained. Because our idea was, well, the guys that want to be knights one day need to be able to teach the fundamentals of fighting. If you don't have the tools to teach how to fight as a knight, you're not serving your main purpose, other than a guy wearing a chain and a belt. So our goal was, we got to teach them the tools. They don't have to be great fighters, they just got to have the tools. So we forced them to teach and show that leadership to the lower level group of guys. And then what's one good way of learning something? Teaching it.
Yeah,
so
great.
yeah, and so that was the case there, is just giving them the opportunity to provide into the group was the innovation, and the aspect of they're going to come in with a different perspective when we're talking to them. It's like, oh, you know what? I never thought about that from a 6'2" guy's height. This is really good. Let's introduce this into the class, because keeping the mind open, right? But that's pretty much, that was the thing, is the trainers. And then the one thing with the training thing too, because I'm looking at the question while it's here.
Yeah.
The other part with the training, and I was going through that with my squire that just got offered at Estrella, that's, Vigilant Forever in 2020. There was one area I felt he was lacking the most, was he wasn't teaching. He was going to practice, he was fighting and stuff. And I'm like, dude, you got to start teaching people, and technically he understands, he can have a conversation with any of us, and we'll be on the same level of communication, right? And, understand the terms and what they mean, and what you mean by how to apply them. But he wasn't teaching, spreading that. I'm like, you got to go out there, because the only way you learn to teach is by teaching. And just knowing, I don't know how to teach this. Teach people greatsword because I don't fight greatsword. Somebody comes to me, I just tell them, you need to go talk to this guy. They talk to me about, range or whatever. I know that area well, and I think that's where we stay, not stay in our wheelhouse to not grow, but know those limitations of, this is what I teach, and then sharing the ball and passing it around, so that's kind of the answer to the question. I could ramble on forever. Sorry.
I think having an actual methodology that you teach from is a core component of that too. Because we've mentioned several times on here that the old school training methodology for SEA combat was just throw them out there in the field and hope they magically pick it up. And I think one of the big changes in the last 15, 20 years has been that we are teaching from a methodology. We're teaching systems, right, rather than styles, and that we can, the very concrete, step-by-step process. And that was something that, like I said before, like 15 plus years ago, was very rare. Really didn't exist that much. And so starting with that, having methodology, and when you're teaching your students that methodology and they kind of learn by that process, they're familiar with it, having been taught that way. And then it becomes an easier transition because you actually have tools that you can give them to say, go teach this person this drill that we do for range, and teach this person this drill that we do for footwork. And even if they don't really understand the drill themselves, just, like you said, Kraven, just, making the attempt to do it. And there, I think there is definitely more that we can do to proactively do what you're talking about. And it sounds like you are doing that intentionally and deliberately, where you're like, okay, it's your turn to be the teacher. I think there's more that we can do to encourage that. The other side of that is sometimes people end up becoming trainers by necessity. I know I had, one of my squires was at practice when I wasn't there, and he was local night marshal, and he sees a couple of fighters out there that are just messing it up. It's just some really awful stuff. And it was a couple of days after that practice, he's like, okay, before anybody says anything, let me tell you what actually happened. And it was these two guys that were just murdering our sport. And he goes up there, okay, you guys got to stop. You got to stop. And he says, this is just flat step. And he took what he was comfortable with sharing, and said, this is what I know. This is what you do. Just do this. And, week later, one of those guys was, went home, did the work. And, but, that was like, Lachlan ended up kind of accidentally in that position where he's like, this is just so awful. I can't watch this. So you guys got to stop. And sometimes that's how you get into it. That's how it happens, because nobody else knows more than you do. So it's like, okay, well, we're just got to try this.
Yeah, well, you get stuck with the ball being the baronial marshal, and that's why you end up, it's like, okay, I'm that guy, and or some other knight, and to talk about that evolution a little bit before we go further, because you think about it, back in the day, it was so and so style, like Brannos, when we were watching the videos Tuesday, it's like, oh, that's so and so style, that's so and so style, and and it became the school of how people fight, so everybody fights the same, which is probably not the best when it comes down to it. And now we're evolving away from, it's like fighting this one way, and everybody in my household fights this way, is disintegrating over time, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's so many more ways now. I mean, in the past, we had a couple of systems and people could name them. And I think now we're on Tuesday nights, we're going through like each kingdom and the systems and where they started. It was amazing to me to see the system change so drastically in Atenveldt. So it was a really nice learning scenario for me on that end. But it's interesting to see how those styles develop. And then we have lots more styles now, right? I mean, we can almost go to each kingdom and say what kind of style they use, or what kind of couple of different styles they use is what we're finding out, right? And maybe where pieces of those styles came from, or grew out of. And so it's been very interesting in that fact. One thing I'm going to say is, there's somebody who's going to ask this question, and that is, do you have kind of the playbook that you guys used written down somewhere so we can post it up, because they'll probably want to read it. So
Nope.
that you guys, but I think he's looking, these people look just for, did you guys, for your practice, you talk about, hey, here's what we're gonna do. Did you guys ever write that?
Yeah, I actually have an informal document in my Google Docs for that, because I wrote down notes about it, because
Great.
Yeah, because really the other part too was, like if you wanted to organize a practice the same way, because it was successful, and it hit a broad audience of different variety of types of fighters with different skills that they brought to the table, but yeah, I actually do have something.
So if you could share that later, that would be wonderful. I'll hit you up, and we'll get it out there for people, because I think you guys, the good part is I do some of the same things, but I think you guys did a nice job. I love your 8-week review scenario. I love that you're like, hey, we're spending 8 weeks doing this. All those pieces kind of work into each other. I know for ours, we added within a period of time, we added bear pit, or some type of tournament, so that people still had a chance to do the fun stuff, and there was still pickup areas for people that didn't want to practice that way. That was perfectly fine. We're not going to force people to just want to go have fun. But I think a written down formal method where somebody could say, hey, you want to try this, might be a great way for people to, look at, hey, we starting fight practices over again. So how about we give this a try? And it could just be a couple of people. It could be 4 people. And then those 4 people could be like, hey, how about we rotate and each of us teach what we do well?
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the key things is, it's the aspect of being organized, because if you flow things together at the right pace, especially with a new person, you go to get them through stages of building the fundamentals to where more advanced guys, if you have a schedule of what you're doing, they can refine skills and stay focused on those, because we can squirrel so easy. I think anybody that loves fighting ends up knowing how to squirrel at some point, and they just can't help themselves because something's cool. I'm gonna learn how to throw a Milanese today. We're not working on that, but it does kind of, I think also too, it maximizes our training time, because you think about it, like at that time I was in Phoenix, right? So in the Central Valley of Arizona, we had 3 baronies. There was 2 private practices going on, so you had 5 practices you could go to in a week, right? To where, and so hours of time in the helmet are exponential compared to somebody. I live down south where we were having a practice, but maybe there'd be 2 of us in my house. And then I would go to the Brannos practice, and that's like maybe an hour and a half of actual fighting a week. That's not much helmet time. So at least having focus is like you're not straying out and you're staying on your plan to improve yourself and not sliding backwards, I guess, or putting the time you need to focus into it.
Well, and also there's when you look at the difference between training and practice, for a while at my house I was doing just unarmored training, and there's so much work that you can get done in 1 hour of actual training than you can in several hours of just fighting. And if we could, make that time to have that happen a little more frequently, because I mean that's part of the process, right? We have to teach them how to do the thing, and there's so much work that can get done in just an hour or 2 of actual training, and helmet time. Like there's no substitute for it, right? There's a lot of training and a lot of practice, pel work and stuff that's going on right now, but until you can actually put your helmet on and hit people with sticks, you don't know if this is actually going to work. It's all just theory until you make it work. But there is a lot of work that you can do outside of that doesn't have to be fully armored stuff to get the benefit out of it.
Well, that's why I thought, like when the Lucan interview, I was thinking of doing the boffer stuff, but more out of the necessity of trying to keep the guys fighting during the summer, because it's 100 degrees out at 9 o'clock at night in the backyard, and it's just hot, and you don't want to wear all the stuff. But it's like, oh yeah, the boffer weapons are good. And I'm sitting there listening, and I'm like, yeah, we really need to just get on the ball. And now maybe we can train with great weapons without everybody getting banged up. And it's like, all right, we'll get some pole arm and some bastard sword in without limiting the damage to each other. So I thought that was kind of cool when he was bringing that up. There's some good value to.
Yeah, well, we're going to be talking to Duke Randallson on Steera next month, so we expect we're going to get some more about the foam stuff when we talk to him. So looking forward to that too.
So here's a question I'm going to kind of throw out since we're looking for questions. What do you think was the biggest change? What pushed you over that place where you're like, okay, I'm working on fighting. I'm kind of the at that medium level to, hey, I can do this, and that you get that pop, right? Sometimes after you're knighted where you're like, now I'm really focused and I'm going to push right through something, and there's something clicks in your style. Did you have anything like that?
Yeah, well, it's like I always loved fighting. It's always been a passion, right? And and I had a good foster knight that gave me the philosophy I live off now. And that really helped propel me to just be on the path, right? But I started traveling a little bit more and started talking to other fighters. And when I picked up the center grip, I was out in Cayuga de Potrero War, and I fought, my usual routine every year was to make sure to fight Duke Dietrich out there, right? And he had this center grip, fought him there. I'm like, oh my God, I got like 5 more shots I can throw. The shield's never in my way, you know, so the heater just basically disappeared except for melee, right? But after that, you know, just in a couple months of just having fun in fighting, I started learning some stuff. I went and fought in the Principality, one of the last few Principalities. I did great. And that was when the moment hit where it's like, yeah, I need to push harder with this style, you know, because I'm having fun. You know, that was the part that really threw it over. It was fun. You know, I got weird flack for being center grip, round shield, and all that stuff was, you know, which was to me a time where I'm like, well, if it works, right? But anyhow, but yeah, I think that was kind of a pivot point for me there, you know. Training after having a squire and trying to explain range for like an hour, I decided that, you know, you're a knight and you're, you know, like this is like after my first year or two, like you really need to learn how to teach people how to fight because you sound like an idiot right now to the 16-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we were at Estrella, I was working with you. You know, it was, you know, I saw the interviews with you and Arius. So there was you, Arius, and Jonathan Von Trotha that were all kind of like, that all kind of won crown right about the same time. You all kind of broke through all about the same time. And you know, interesting thing about all 3 of those guys and Duke Aaron was very similar in this, that you were the guys that were out. You got out of your kingdom. And, you know, I followed you guys at Penzic, by Jared Estrella. And we sit down and talk about this stuff. And it's like, and you know, those guys that are getting out of kingdom, that are getting away from their own practice. And I think that was one of the big things that I saw you do. Like all 3 of you guys were going after people that were outside your kingdom.
Yeah, you know, Duke Aaron was one of the earlier guys that were doing that, you know, and you see him, he's come back doing this new stuff, you know, like, oh, he went and explored to a new land and he brought back ideas, right? You know, and then Duke Jonathan loved going to Penzic, you know, and it's like, oh, I got to go out there. It's like, I'm going to fight other people. And I just started asking questions, you know, it's like, oh, that's, you know, because, you know, when we were young, you know, we remember sitting in the hay bales and going, there's those Dukes and they're all fighting over in the corner over there. And you're like, I want to be one of those guys. But it's because we never ask. And we just had to go out there and like, hey, tell me about this. You know, we didn't do that. And now it's like, you know, you hit that certain point, you're like, oh, I'm going to go travel. I'm going to go talk to this Brannos guy I heard about. I'm going to go fight this Ragnvaldr guy, you know, and you start picking up tips and like, hey, what do you think of this other stuff? And you start comparing theories that you have and you start getting validation from somebody you don't even know, you know. So travel, I think, is a huge factor. You know, a lot of times we throw it in the knighting for our squires when we talk to them, but anybody who wants to be a good fighter, you don't always have to want to be a knight or a king. Traveling is the key, is to get better.
I think so many people get wrapped up in this idea that if I can beat, you know, these 1 or 2 people in my kingdom, then I can be king. You know, and it's like, okay, that's great. You can win your crown under these, you know, certain circumstances, or you can go to Penzic, you can go to Straight Great West War, you can go other places and fight people that you don't fight on a regular basis. You know, because you know, one of the things about that is that, you know, the more you're exposed to the differences, the more you understand the commonalities. And you know, we try to. So many people want to just Rolodex fighters in their kingdoms and like, I just got to beat this one guy, and then I'm in. You know, and that's like, and okay, and then what? You know, or you can go out and you can learn to compete with Brannos, Ragnvaldr, or me, and you know, and all these other guys. And I mean, if you can, if your fight is good enough to, you know, maybe not beat all those guys, but to like compete, it's going to be good enough to win your crown.
Yeah, and I think another point there is, you know, it's amazing to pick up these subtleties from, you know, at that level. It's so cool. It's like, okay, what are you doing there? And you know, it's just tiny little stuff. You're like, oh, and then you go home and try it, and it's like, oh, I gotcha, you know. And I would agree 100%. I mean, my style when I first, you know, really started when it changed, really a lot of my style came from Meridiers. Because we had a big overhand guard where I came from originally, and then I was watching Meridiers, you know, down there playing with those guys, and I'm like, well, this makes a lot more sense. And then, all of a sudden it's like, it's so easy to hit other people in the arm or in the body. I'm going to just keep doing this, and, Duke Gareth out of Meritier's, the incredibly fast breaking angle shots that he did were, all of a sudden made me think about how these angles turn inside with your wrist and how you can break them back and the timing of change. And that just changed a ton of stuff. But, those are the types of things you're finding these best guys around. And obviously the travel is not easy for everyone. So, but nowadays we're in a place where it's easier to find video and people teaching. So it definitely helps. I think there's still a layer of, saying, getting that feedback from them so they can get that true insight. But I think a lot of times, like you were saying, people are like, well, my goal is to be a knight. And then it's like, oh, well, my goal is to be king. Well, that goal of being that personal goal of being the best you can isn't something that's glorious, right? So a lot of times that's not set as a goal, right? And I talk to people about that all the time. It's like, yeah, there are a lot of great tournaments, and winning crown is totally different than almost any other tournament. But remember, there are 20 people in that crown or 30 people in that crown. You probably have tournaments that have 100 people in it, with all these knights that just don't want to fight crown, or dukes that are just done for now. So it's like, which one's really better? Is it really showcasing, becoming king? Is it really showcasing that you're great? Or is it showcasing that you're on your way to maybe be great and move on?
Yeah, and I guess it's always going to be a matter of perspective. To me, like when I was getting close to getting knighted, at that point I was like, I just came to the conclusion, like, why am I even worried about that? I don't care about that. I really want to be the guy that walks out the practice and everybody's like, I don't want to fight that freaking dude, And I was like, and then ever since then, just my mind was like, hey, yeah, it's a personal journey. You're out there to beat yourself. And I know it's very Bruce Lee kind of thinking, but we all are kind of into that and it works for us. But it is, it's like, hey, if I want to be good so I can beat myself. And that's the challenge every time. And if I got to go to Penzic to do it, I'm going to go I'm great at Western, but it's my passion. I love this. And I think that's the thing we all have in common. It's like, this is our hobby. We love it. Otherwise we'd be doing what? Knitting? I mean, I could see Brannos knitting maybe,
I've got yarn.
Hey, don't tell everyone. So I guess on that end, something that here's a question, because I this is one of these tricky subjects that I see a lot of people lose opportunity to keep moving forward, and that is, you obviously reigned at least twice. You can tell us how many more in a minute here, and you said you served as Kingdom Seneschal, some other positions. I find that a lot, especially in reigning, there's like all of a sudden you don't have time, right? And so how did you get past that, or what did you do through that period of time?
So while training and fighting Seneschal and crowns.
So I mean, did you continue going to practice while you were on the throne?
Yeah, because I don't want to go out of town, get beat up by some guy, and say be king of Atenveldt, because I see guys do that all the time when they fight some other guy, And I'll be honest with you, the standard I had for myself is a representation of Atenveldt, and it's always, and everybody that's been crowned knows it's hard to be in fighting shape like you were the day you won crown when you're doing the king of stuff, because you're doing so many other things all throughout the week. So you get to an event, you're not focused about beating somebody up. It's like coaching all the time. You're not thinking about beating people up. You're in coach mode, so I would definitely make sure to go to practice and before, any big event that we were traveling, because I've done most of my reigns during the summer. I only did one Estrella reign out of them. So it's like, all right, let's get trained up before, because I got to represent the kingdom. I don't have to be Mr. Badass. I just got to be good. That's all I have to do, So I would go to practice every week and just stay dedicated, but I'm addicted to it. The other thing,
Yeah, well, it's the great irony of our sport that you have to be a really good fighter to be able to win crown, and then as soon as you win crown, you kind of don't get to fight anymore. Because I think Duke Kraven out there in the mid realm had posted something up during it. I think it was his second reign that has always really stuck with me, and it was apparently somebody asked him you know you know something about, it's like, oh, it's unfortunate you don't get a fight as much while you're king, and Kalik's answer to that was so, well, when I am king of the entire kingdom. I'm not just king of the fighters. And especially at events, I've had some of our signature events where I didn't get a fight at all because I was wrapped up in in peerage meetings and business meetings and all this, and that's the job, and that's part of what you have to do. And I know for me and the last couple of reigns with having kids of a certain age, fighter practice is the part that has suffered for me, because I can either spend 2 hours at practice, or I can spend that 2 hours plus at home, including travel time and all that, getting ready for the weekend, or organizing stuff so that we can make a good showing at the event itself. So, for me lately, I said with kids of a certain age, the practice, while I'm king is the thing that kind of suffers a bit.
Yeah, it's keeping that balance all the time,
Yeah.
and the focus, but also too, I think, geographically for me, it's easy. I'm, half hour away to practice, so popping over to practice is just a small interruption compared to other people. It's not easy for a lot of people, and I think, that's this sometimes, for where I'm at, some guys forget how easy they have it. It's like there's a lot of people don't have 5 practices and 2 hours distance. They're lucky to have a practice in 4 hours distance.
Yeah.
And then they don't show up, and that kills me. And I'm like, I'm at practice with 3 other guys, and I'm like, I'm in a large little metropolitan area for our kingdom, and there's 4 of us here. Shit, we could have about 10, 15 guys, because I got squires that moved, and they're like practice, and there's 2 guys sharing, a helmet, and they're both just taking turns fighting the one other guy that's there. I'm like, I don't know. That part just kills me. I don't know. Sorry. Tangent.
Yeah.
So here's another question. What do you think, obviously coming out of this, and let's I'm going to be real. There are people out there still getting a little bit of practice in here and there. They've formed their own pockets of people they trust to do that. But what do you expect coming out of this when official practices start back up again?
You want my my hope or my realistic?
Yes.
Okay, so my hope is we'll have a very good, strong year after this. My realistic is we'll have a couple of months of that, and then it'll go back the way it was before, COVID happened, and it'll be back to the same numbers. Not optimistic, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I think as a society, we're going to have to probably, or as our sport specifically, we're going to have to look at, recruiting better, and how do we get there? I think we've already seen, people want to blame lots of reduction in fighter numbers to all kinds of stuff, age, other sports in our society, all this other stuff. But I think our sport's also changed enough that that the casual player is relatively hard now. And not a knock on us, but sometimes driving training sometimes makes it a little less fun for them, or not having enough training makes it not normal for them if they came out of a martial art or a sports career. So I guess there's going to be a hard question of how do we get more people, how do we get them back on the field and make them enjoy the time that they're spending together.
Well, I think the one thing we may get out of this is we had a chance to reset. We got the system got a reboot in a lot of ways. And I bet all you guys, all the more experienced guys are probably excited about traveling a little bit. And I think if we start doing a little bit of traveling and encouraging others to go with us a little bit, we might be able to kind of rebuild that a little bit, because I mean, the excitement in the community, I think, is what's been missing. I'm not all over the United States. I don't know the demographics of everybody's kingdom and how well things are, but the feeling's always been that things have been declining with numbers, and we've been getting newer, younger people. It's like I mentioned last week too. It's like we're missing a generation of people, between our generation and the kids, the people that are in their 20s right now, and we're starting to see more of them. And I think if we just get excited and just start to travel and start building up the stories of things that, enticed us to be excited about it, might push things through.
Yeah, I know. After all this, I know so many of us are starved for contact right now. It's like we so desperately want to be with our people, right? And hit them with sticks. And so there's probably going to be depending on, well, first off, it's going to probably be a phased in approach, but there will probably be a year of people pretty excited about when we can finally go to all the big events again. That first year I think we're going to see some pretty good numbers there, and then we'll see after that, and I think having better access, some of what we're doing, some of the interviews that are going out there, I think it's giving people better access, and we're now using the tools that have been available to us for some time to really improve our sport and to get better global access to the content and the information. So definitely that keeps up.
Yeah, and also it's building those connections. It's like like through the Duke interviews and stuff. The message is getting out to people. It's like, hey, it's okay, come bother me because I'm talking to somebody. Doesn't mean that we're having some private secret conversation about Duke stuff. We're talking about making gin and tonics and stuff like that. You should interrupt us. So it's like, hey, can you fight me? Yes, we will. It's like, tell me what happened to you and what got you involved in this. And I think maybe some of those barriers are broken down. You find out, hey, yeah, this is a regular guy that has a job and does this hobby and loves doing this. And hopefully that, and then I think the videos and philosophy and concepts might demystify things, because you know what, we have always lived in that this person's so great, they won crowned 6 million times, they're an uber Duke, and I'm not worthy, and they see these legend things, and that's where their mind goes rather than the art itself, I guess. I kind of like talking in a circle there, but
I'm always hanging out with these Dukes because I knew them when they were squires.
Exactly.
I knew them when we were all squires. I've known them, having been a knight for 30 plus years, and having been a Duke for, I don't know, 20 some odd years now, the number of people that have gotten their duchy, after I did, it's like, yeah, I'm hanging out with those people because I've been hanging out with them since they were squires, since they got started in this whole thing. And they said, how can I have what you have? And I'm like, take it. here's the tools, here's the stuff. And it's like, yeah, I know all these guys because I've been hanging out with them since they were nothing. And likewise, because I was fortunate enough to have people like, Jade and Beck and Fabian give me all of their time when I had nothing to offer them too, and that's the process. And being able to pay that back is its own reward. And really the price you have to pay for that is you just got to ask, because we can't know.
And say hi, because we all built built relationships, and I think that's what this, our business really is in the fighting field, is building relationships.
Right.
Like I take a squire out, he fought a couple of dukes, and now, just for example of dukes, but fought some good fighters, and he got to know who they were. So next time he sees an event, the ice is broken, they're going to hang out, and he's like, hey, I've been working on this, what do you think of this? And I think if we just keep breaking down those barriers, I think we'll get further ahead. We'll always have our detractors, that's been haunting us for years.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when I talked to you about Gregor at Australia, I'm like, hey man, I fought that guy at Great Western War a couple of years ago. He's doing pretty good. I'm like, hey, how's he doing? What's going on with him? And a couple of days later, it's like, oh, he just got offered. I'm like, oh, okay, so yeah, there is something to that, But yeah, I mean, that's a guy you send him after me at Great Western and go, hey, go fight Sean. I'm like, yeah, this guy's going all right, and and so that's a guy that I look after, and I go, whatever happened to the kid, and yeah, that's how those relationships get built, and he's going to have access to a guy like me when he has squires, because you sent him after me and said, go fight that guy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the big part is, all of that interaction between people. And, the good part is if I find somebody that's fighting in a form that I think you guys would help them better at, and I'll be like, hey, I want to introduce you to, and suddenly either the conversation and how you communicate it's better than how I do, or they actually fit what they do well. And that's what elevates that person's fight practice or that person's fight. And, I tell people all the time, you want to do the greatest service in a society, make somebody smile. Because, you don't need to be, we all have to have people be seneschals and all that other stuff. But fundamentally, make somebody smile, and you are doing great service to the society. And I think that's what we find on the fighting field. That's kind of our job, right? To get them people and sell them and make them better, because in the end, they're going to push you right back, aren't they? And that's what makes us better. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying there. Here's another question though, and just so Sean, you might have to take over for a little while. My squire is actually doing a Bardic thing, so she's going to be up next on our Bardic part thing, and I'll probably mute for a little bit. But a question came up. He said, so in a perfect world, how many times a week would you fight, train, or drill? Perfect world scenario. And what do you think? I'm going to add a little more. What do you think if I said I wanted to? I'm going to actually set a goal that most people said. I want to be a knight. How many times a week would Kraven the Unbuilt do this?
Well, in my perfect world, I'd be practicing twice a week. That's how my perfect world was at one point with numbers, but twice a week fits me good. And that's with, like one training day where the focus is on training, and maybe a practice where you get multiple people to mix up and do some fights and do some analyzing and database digging. Squire Kraven, this is kind of a good question, because, it's like all our like even Artemisia and Atenveldt itself had different cultures with knighting and who gets knighted and when and how. So, I mean, knighting can some level be arbitrary. If you want to be a good fighter, then, it's like, yeah, you really got to train twice a week. I really think that's like, that's the magic number to me. You get 2 good practices in twice a week, you're going to constantly excel. If you do 4, I almost think it's a disservice to yourself, unless you're 20.
It is.
Yeah.
That is actually, I mean, fighting once a week is just maintenance. That's just bare maintenance. Fighting twice a week will definitely increase your skill. 3 times is a lot, and 4 times is right out. Fighting 4 times in a week, your body just doesn't have time to recover to be able to do that. So 3 times is a lot, but if we could do 2 fighting sessions in a week and then an event on the weekend, that'd be good. Or more likely now, I'd say 1 actual practice and 1 day of training and drills, and then, you know, an event on the weekend. So it's not all just, you know, time of your armor. Because yeah, the time of the armor, it like it's work, and your body has to recover from that, just like it does, you know, working out. I know a lot of gym rats are, you know, are probably working a lot harder than we do in our sport, but it's still it's a lot.
Well, and I also think with the recovery part too, it's like you're literally getting hit.
Yeah.
You know, so you're boxing and getting punched and bruised and beat up. So 3 days in the ring is much different than 3 days in the gym. You know, and I think that's the difference there. You know, and it, you know, and I think really, yeah, the training and practice are almost two different things. You're using training at practice, and you're training to work on something. You know, and I think that's a key thing. And I think sometimes we do get stuck in that part where we talk about practice, but really we're talking about training, you know, and yeah, there is no replacement for the helmet time. You know, you got to have, you know, application, you know, and so many other forms do that. You know, you have sparring and so many other things. You got to have the helmet time.
Yeah, I mean, you can read a book about rebuilding a car engine, but until you actually, you know, put a wrench on the pistons, you don't know how to rebuild a car engine. You know, yeah, same thing. It's like you can train until the cows come home, but eventually, you know, there's no substitute for sick time, for helmet time. I got to get out there.
Yeah, and that's why, like, when we were talking about the traveling aspect too, you know, that's where, like, after you do it for a while, you're like, you got to travel to go get some different samplings for your training, and that's what keeps pushing you further ahead, you know, in technology and thought process and applying the stuff, you know. And then it also becomes a test. You know, you go to Penzic fight, you know, somebody that you don't know, you find out how well you're reading a fight, and if you can change up your style to them and adjust, do all those tweaks on the fly and stuff, you really get some good practice there out of that too, and makes it fun, you know.
And that's why I love not just, you know, international events, but you know, things like the Outlands Prize Tourney, Ursulmus, you know, things where you have a large sampling of the known world. You know, because for me, one of the best measures of your actual skill, I think, is unknown skill versus unknown skill. You know, because like I said, there's, you know, the Rolodex fighter, just I don't get that. You know, you get these people who are like, oh, well, this person always does this and this. Like, okay, well, just the moment you rely on somebody always doing something, that's when you're going to get caught with your pants down. And you know, this idea that you know, you can just kind of go through your Rolodex and, like, here's your card on how to beat this guy. You know, fighting just doesn't work like that, or at least it shouldn't. And so, you know, the truest test of your skill is being able to just take whatever your skill set is and compare it to, you know, your opponent's skill set, sight unseen. That's the best test of how good your fight really is. And, you know, and so, yeah, getting out to some of those, you know, like I said, that's why Outlands Prize Tourney at Australia has always been like a don't miss event for me, for exactly that. It's like I get to measure myself against, you know, all kinds of people I've just never seen before. I don't know anything about them. They don't know anything about me. My fight has to be good enough. And if it's not, that's exciting to me, right? Because, you know, that's, I mean, part of what drives our success is that feeling that there's more work to do, and that reason for us to actually go home and do the work. And sometimes that reason is you got your ass handed to you. And the better you get, the harder it is to find, to, you know, expose the weaknesses of your style and send you home and make you think about it.
Yeah, you know, that's why you're always, you know, trying to beat yourself and get better, you know. And you know, it's true, you know, it's like somebody beats you up. This is your motivator, because you're like, yeah, I'm getting lazy or whatever, and you just start driving, you know. And like the Outlands tourney at that event is probably a good one, because ever since they went to the bear pit for X amount of times and they're doing point systems or whatever they're doing, You're mixed in there, and you look at the different Erics. Everybody's in there, and you're looking at 5 guys in every Eric that's good. So you're always going to get good fights, and I always tell my squires, like, you got to fight in it, because you're going to get some great experience out of it, and you're going to meet new people, and it is a test, because if you can hold that field for 3 or 4 fights in a row, that's actually, like, 3 fights is just doing good. And you've experienced it too. You're like, oh, well, at home I can get like 6, 7 guys in a row, and there you're like 3 guys and you're out, and you're like, shit.
A couple of years ago, I was in a bear pit with Duke Hansa, right, who I've fought plenty, right, and so Hansa goes in there and he rips off like half a dozen fights in a row, and I go out there and I beat him. I get 3 or 4 fights in, and I run up against Sir Cosmo from Atenveldt, right? Yeah. Cosmo comes out there with his Madu, right, which I fought before. I'm familiar with that. I think I want to say he beat me like 3 times, and then we got a double kill, and then I finally beat him. And it's like, yeah, I've fought a Madu before, but it's like he just had a day against me. And it's like every time I went out there to, I'm just going to go out here and knock out a few victories. Cosmo just steps up and bink, like, oh, okay, well, so yeah, that apparently there's something I got to work on there, and that's one of the things I love about that format is you'll be cruising along, and then that guy is just a bad matchup for you, and out you go.
And it's always a good reminder that nobody is the best fighter, right? Because there's always one guy out there that's going to beat you, and he's going to beat you every damn time, and you don't hold weight and going, oh, you're the best or whatever. It's like, no, I'm not. There's a lot of best out there, and I'm trying to see if I can beat all of them.
Yeah, and that's that was something that Sagan taught me a long time ago about how good you want to be, and the number that he's always used is that top 2%, right? Because that top 2% of fighters in our sport, it changes all the time. There's a lot of really great fighters from our history that are not, that aren't fighting anymore. And there's some that have coming up from the ranks. I mean, Sven out of Anstiora, I remember it was when I was king at Penzig last time, it was 8 years ago, I guess. I'm out there on the pickup field with me and Timur. So I was king, Timur was crown prince, Stephen of Beckenham, right? And it's 3 of us just sitting around, chatting and everything. And here comes this squire from, nowhere. It's like, hey, you mind if I get in on this? Yeah, well, it was Sven, right? And so he gets a handful of me and Timur and Beck. And we worked him over. We worked him over hard, and he was just eating it up. And now, he's been one of the best fighters in our sport he's been world class. He's among that top 2%, has been for several years now, and that's how it happens. That's how you get there. So that number always changes, and so competing against that and we always get asked, that question always comes up in the online forums, right? Like, who's the best fighter, right? Who's the top 10 fighters? That always comes up. It comes up all the time, and it's a good exercise, I think, for the most part. I think it's generally a healthy exercise, and you see those names change from time to time, and you see some of those names stay. But the answer that I've had for that for a while now is I could not tell you 20 people in this sport who I think are flat out, without a doubt, hands down better than me. Like, just murder me, kick my ass all the time. But I can name you closer to 50 people who I think are as good as I am, who are on that same level. And sometimes I get them, sometimes they get me.
Yeah, I think that's the big point, is, I think what's coming out of this is you go and find, I think we all have goals, and I think obviously you guys' goal is to get better, right? Still now, after how many years now, Sean?
How many years I've been a knight, or how many years I've been
fighting?
1985.
There you are.
So this year was 35 years of this year to Estrella. Estrella
And
was
you're
the first
still
time I
trying to
stepped on
get
the
better,
playing
right?
field. Oh yeah, I honestly, there's a part of me that believes I haven't hit my prime.
Yeah,
There's a
good
part
for
of me that believes that, and I was just talking to one of my former squires, Duke Michael, about some stuff last weekend. I'm like, there's some things that I do intuitively, but I need to be doing them deliberately. And I'm like,
Yeah.
where do I go from here? It's like, yeah, there's a part of me that believes that I haven't hit my prime. I could be better.
Kraven, how long you been fighting now?
Seriously, for 30 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're right in with me. So it's the same way. And I tell you, I tell people a lot, and I said it kind of last year, but even this year is even more. I have worked harder now on becoming good than I ever have in my life. Right. The things, of course, we're missing is travel and finding those spaces to do stuff. But man, working out now, and just didn't work out before, adding a ton of boxing feet, a ton of drill work, it's just, better shape than I've ever been in my whole life in general. And I think it's that drive, and I still want to get better, right? Even with the limitations I have right now, I still want to push myself.
Well, that's why it's so exciting to have somebody like beat you, like flat out beat you, not just get by, but that's why it's exciting. It's like, oh yeah, because it is rare, it's and the for guys like us who need that to drive us, the better you get, the harder it is to find that person that is going to take you to the woodshed and is going to make you like actually think about what you're doing.
Well, guys, we got about 5 minutes, and I just want to give Kraven a chance to go ahead and do you have anything you want to wrap up to say? Other than you love us, I know, and you look forward to fighting us. And,
yeah, right. Like, hey, I think if all of us keep communicating and working harder to hit a broader spectrum of fighters within the club, we'll be able to build, a new generation, or we'll move through, and our culture will change. It's in a process of changing, and I think if we stay consistently working together, so that way that generation that's after us will be another tier, and we'll be just the old guys. Remember when we went to practice and you had to figure out how everybody fought, and they'll be like, that's so old school. It's like high style, whatever that is, But I think we just need to continue on that path, and remind people it's like, it's not about ego, it's about getting better.
Yeah, and Kraven, I'd like to say, part of what we're doing at the Coach's Corner is we are trying to, it's not just. I mean, there are a handful of us that are kind of lead on the project, but it's not just us. We are trying to build a community, and we're trying to build a community of trainers to make better training accessible to the SCA at large. And so your input on the group and the Coach's Corner is definitely appreciated. When you throw some questions out there and give us some things to think about. So really appreciate that. And as somebody that I witnessed as a trainer, because I'd gone out to Chicago to work with those guys a couple of years after you did, and it was really convenient being able to dovetail with what you had already given them. So it's really great to have you as part of this community. So thanks for your contributions there.
Yeah, totally. I can't agree more. It's actually been fun. Thanks for inviting me to the fighter symposium thing you set up about a month or two ago. That was great. It seemed like you had a ton of people there doing all the Zoom sessions all day long. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and I'll get you the recording of yours. I heard that was done being edited.
Oh,
so
awesome!
You can use it for a training tool. Yeah.
Great. So they just like voice overed me and did all that, right? Just
yeah. Actually, the videos,
give you a Donald Duck voice.
Yeah. Actually, the videos of puppets. They're talking. Yeah. They're just going on the screen. It's like.
That's pretty close to me. I get you. But no, I really appreciated that, and look forward to being able to do some face-to-face stuff in the future soon. And thank you very much for coming out and being part of this. It's nice to get that kind of you know, a lot of this is kind of, you know, we get it a little bit from everybody, but you know that, right? I mean, when you're after the same thing, the fundamental is there, and I guess sooner or later everyone's like, hey, this is like repeat every time because they're all saying the same thing. Well, get an idea. They're all saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Because that's how they got there, right? And
maybe there's some truth to it.
Yep, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but I think it was a great show. We're looking at Sean. What do we have next week?
So next week we are doing. We're going to have Alan on again, and we're going to be talking to him about decision-making process, which is an episode that we've done before. But when he was on for his conversation before, that was definitely a part of that we wanted to expand on a little bit more. And he's just got some really good insights on probing the fight and data collection. And so we're going to talk to him a little bit more about that. So definitely looking forward to that. And again, I wanted to do a shout out to we're doing what we can, providing content here and trying to provide access to better fighting. And there's several other shows out there that are providing some great content as well. I'd like to put out a shout out to the Sisters interview series that is Mistress Ashaksi and Sir Rifkin out in Ontier that have several things that they're doing. One of which is new to us is a show they're doing called Grace Under Pressure, where they're talking to a lot of consorts. They had talked to Mary Grace a couple of weeks ago, and Magna. I can't remember who they have this weekend, but that happens on Sundays. The Sisters interview also happens on Wednesdays. A lot of good stuff out there. So more content is better as far as I'm concerned. So find your niche, find the show that interests you, and have a good time binge watching the SCA until we can all get together and hit people with sticks again.
Exactly.
Radio free SCA, right?
Exactly.
Well, Vesper, I think we're kind of wrapping her up here. And of course, we have to give you a giant thank you as usual.
Always.
You've, made our life so much simpler. It's I don't know how we'd be doing it without you.
Thank you. Well, I mean, this wouldn't happen without you all doing what you do. It's just a team thing, right?
We're going to do it one way or another. but you make it a lot easier. We are going to sit around and talk stick. So you make it a lot easier.
Thank you. Thank you all for tonight's episode. Super excited to see you back in the future on Fridays. And for everybody tuning in, check out the Coach's Corner. I will post a link after this show so you can head over there. All right.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely week.
Ciao, guys. You guys have a great weekend, okay?
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
All right.